sort of started?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay. Hello and welcome to tonight's very special event and discussion, Fond Farewell, a humanist efficient sharing event on end-of-life ceremonies. My name is Robert Hamilton. I'm not a humanist officiant, but I'm president of Humanist Ottawa and host of this event. So, Humanist Ottawa has been operating since 1968. We are secular humanists, atheists, and agnostics who support a world where reason and compassion guide public policy and social values to enable the fulfillment of human potential. Our organization is a participant in the affiliate program of Humanist Canada, and this little later this year will be ratified as an associate member of Humanist International. Despite the easing of COVID-19 pressure, we are an active association of like-minded individuals from all walks of life. If you are interested in social issues both locally and abroad, consider joining Humanist Ottawa. So, all that ado aside, let's dive into Fond Farewell, a humanist efficient sharing event. You can see that we have a number of people in the meeting room today. And I just want to mention that the event is being recorded and will be available later, I believe on our Facebook page and elsewhere. So if you want to mute your video or change your name, you can do that in the participant list of and on the chat. The chat is open and available for people to speak to each other and to our speaker. So so please feel free to use that chat or use the emote icons on the bottom of your screen. Where's my here page? Okay, so let's dive into the agenda for today. I'll just make a few opening remarks, and then we'll have the meeting's divided into essentially two parts: our keynote presentation and a short Q&A following that keynote presentation. And then the second part of our meeting will be a panel discussion where we have a group of panelists to discuss a few issues related to end-of-life ceremonies and the role of the humanist officiant in that. And then I'll just wrap it up at the end. So that's just a quick two-part component to the meeting. And so let's get started. Since its inception, the history of Humanist Ottawa has been intertwined with humanist officiant services, mainly wedding services and other life events, including funeral events. The Humanist Association of Ottawa, now Humanist Ottawa, spearheaded the initiative to establish provincially recognized officiant services, which were ultimately transferred to the Humanist Association of Canada, which is now, of course, Humanist Canada. Former members of HAO also went on to establish humanist officiant services under the Ontario Humanist Society, OHS. So as you can see, it makes sense for Humanist Ottawa to be hosting this event tonight. Just as a quick note, tonight's event is in commemoration of former Humanist Ottawa board member Mike Ateo, who last month received medical assistance in dying. He was a member of our board until the last week prior to his death. So this is after a long struggle with cancer. This event is in commemoration of Mike. So, although weddings are obviously the mainstay of what humanist officiants are called upon to do, funerals, memorial ceremonies, and celebrations of life represent another important role for humanist officiants that provide deep, meaningful benefits for those facing an often difficult life event. Officiating such ceremonies often tests the officiant's emotional strength, empathy, and respectful consolation that collectively form the essential contribution of the officiant's role. So against that backdrop, it gives me great delight to introduce to you today, this evening, Dave Corkery, Dave is founder of Once Upon a Wedding Humanist Officiant Services. Dave is a retired 35-year member of the Ottawa Fire Service, and he is an officiant authorized by Humanist Canada and licensed under the Marriage Act of Ontario to perform marriages and other life ceremonies. He performs non-religious ceremonies, including weddings, child welcomings, funerals, and similar events. So thank you, Dave, for agreeing to speak with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Robert. You just took care of page 1 of my introduction.
That was just introduction to you.
Okay, well, my name is Dave Corkery. I'm a lifelong resident of Ottawa. Born in the mid-50s, my schooling was an interesting one. I went to English school for grade kindergarten and grade 1, and my mother dragged me across the parking lot one day to go continue my education in the French system. I'm 25% French Canadian, so I'm very happy to be able to speak French and English, and I was raised in the French submersion system of Ottawa. My education, I went on to Algonquin College, and I got my diploma in biochemical technology. And like Robert said, I had a 35-year career with the Ottawa Fire Services. Let me see. What made me decide to get into this? My background was Catholic, and I was like everybody else. I went to school, I believed what my parents told me, and I wanted more information. And like a lot of people, I'm sure, on this panel, on this Zoom call tonight, you start asking questions and you realize they can't answer them. And when you can't answer, when you get to the third question and they start getting a little angry or perturbed, that's when you know there's something going on. So in grade 7, I realized I was not a believer anymore. I became too aware of the Bible inconsistencies that was given in the catechism class as a little note of interest. I made my nun teacher, Sister Doris Robichaud, I made her cry, and about 2 years later, she left the field. She got married, left the nunnery, the convent, and she got married, and she had a bunch of kids. So maybe I did something good having those arguments with her in grade 7. So when I retired, right before I retired, I wanted to do something interesting and fulfilling with my life afterwards. After fighting fires and kicking down doors and hauling people out of bed at 3 o'clock in the morning when the house was on fire, I thought I'd do something just as interesting. And I went to one of my sons his friend got married very young, 21 years old. And there was a lady named Diane Schmolke who was in the Ottawa Humanist. And I didn't even know that there was such a thing as an officiant. This is going back about 10 years ago. This is something that I think we have to push. This is something I think we have to promote a bit more, because I've been aware of atheism all my life, but I never heard of a humanist officiant. When I saw what she was doing, I'm like a lot of you people who are now officiants. I'm sure when you saw your first officiant, you realized that's what I want to do. I can do that. It was a simple process, but it was just so wonderful to see what she was doing and how she focused everything on the couple themselves. Okay. I really wanted to get into this after I went to a funeral. It was a friend of ours. They just sent out a young priest, and all he did at the funeral parlor was give us a blast for not going to church and not believing what he believed. And he basically gave us hell for 10 minutes. And I realized that this is wrong. I've been to a lot of Catholic funerals where basically you get an hour of dogma and church talk and maybe 30 seconds of the person's name. I just knew somehow that this was wrong, that we have to provide more of a service to the family, of course, and show respect to the deceased. So it was basically the funerals that I wanted to get into first, but not knowing how to do it. And I went to the wedding afterwards. And that's when I realized, okay, this is something, this is how I can put the two of them together. We know that church attendance is plummeting in the West, in the Western countries. More and more of us, we're getting called more and more the humanist officiants, or non-religious officiants are getting called more and more to do weddings, not in a church, obviously, but people's backyards, at lakes, at cottages, and in venues. So the demand for humanist officiants is going to be very, very big in the future. We need services that reflect the life of the person and not the repetitive dogma that you get when you have a church service. So my goal is to spread the idea of humanist funerals and make them mainstream. Show people the option, because times are changing and we have to deal with the reality of life and death while being compassionate and empathetic. If you'll allow me now, I'm going to read a little bit of what's in the training manual of what is a humanist funeral. A humanist funeral or memorial is a non-religious service that is both a dignified farewell and a celebration of a life that once was. It recognizes the profound sadness from family and friends and colleagues of saying goodbye while celebrating the life and legacy of a loved one that has passed away. Humanist funerals are an appropriate and loving way to honor a life with warmth, sensitivity, and meaning without religion. This type of service is important for the family and friends as they can focus their thoughts on the person who has died rather than worshiping a deity. Non-religious funerals have the same status in law as religious funerals. Friends and family greatly appreciate that each humanist funeral is individually written, giving the officiant the flexibility to create a service and atmosphere that best fits the personality and life of the deceased and what this person meant to family and friends. There is no one type of humanist service. What is important is that funeral or memorial services performed must be right for the person who has died and for their close family. It can be a great comfort to have provided the type of ceremony that the person who has died would have wanted, and to have remembered them as the unique individual they were. So my method it goes like so. When a person realizes they don't want to bring the deceased to a church, they don't want to have a service in a church, they will contact Humanist Canada. At this stage of my career, they phone me directly now. The word is getting out that I do this, and I'm getting called directly. The first thing I do is I meet with the family contact. I get a general idea of what they want, and then I start collecting info about the deceased person. I get his life history, family relationships, their story, their wishes, and their dreams and their hobbies. I ask as many questions as I can think. They provide me with lots of information, and one question leads to another question, and I eventually get a lot of information on the deceased. One of the things I'm really big on is getting their friends and family to get up and take part in the service. I get the names of those who wish to speak, and I advise them that I'm here to help them with their speech if needed, how to construct a eulogy, what to do and what not to do, especially wing it. I've taken 2 years of Toastmaster training, and I know one thing: you don't get up and just throw a speech out. It's likely not going to work. You get tongue-tied, you forget what you want to say. So I help them actually create the script itself. Getting all the information, including email addresses of all concerned, the phone numbers, which is good, also good for texting. I contact them immediately after leaving the contact person. I learn what their relationship is to the deceased, and I also chat with them for maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes, getting more information as to their personal relationship with the person. One thing about funerals compared to weddings, time is very short. If I get a call on Monday, the funeral is likely on Thursday. It's 2-3 days, and you don't have any time to fool around. You have to get on this right away. So when I talk to the people, I'm asking questions and they're also asking questions. And I answer as many questions as I can as to the process that I'm going to be using. They can give input, obviously. I let them know that I'm available anytime via email or texting to maintain contact and to make them feel comfortable. So I start on day one, I start getting things organized. The second contact, which is usually the next day, I do it again. I phone the main contact and see if anything has changed, if anything has come up. I'll text them, I'll email them, and I give them updates on what I have done. They give me updates on what is happening. Like, for example, what venue they're going to be using. It could be a venue at a funeral home. It could be at a park. It could be at a hall. I contact the speakers again on the second day to see how things are going. I advise them and assist them how to craft their speech. I have them get everything down on paper. Basically, one of the techniques is to write and write and write and just keep writing until you're tired of writing. Get up, go for a walk, go for a nap, have lunch, come back and then start tightening it up. Take out the stuff that you find repetitive. These are the tips that I give the speakers. They don't always listen, by the way. Sometimes you'll get people that just, I'm okay, I can handle this. And the several times it's happened and it's just been a disaster because they get choked up, they get emotional, they don't know what to say. You may not get all the info from the family. They just forget certain things, which is understandable. But the more you keep asking questions, the more you keep talking to them over the next 2-3 days, more information comes out, and you'll be able to get a more clear picture of what should be done. And the third contact is generally the night before, the day before the ceremony. Again, I ask them how things are going. I tell them who I've contacted. I give their responses, and make sure that they can say what they want to achieve. I also get info on the venue because by the third day, the venue has been chosen. I get more of an idea of the people attending, the size of the audience, and I get updates from them on their end and finalize all the logistics. Now for the memorial or for the funeral, I've only done memorials. I have not had a casket in the location that I've been, but everyone has been cremated and we have a memorial. They can be formal, they can be informal. I've done one at a funeral home. I've done one at a park. I've done one at a venue on Prince of Wales Drive. They can be also done in the family home. They can be done in the backyard. The only advantage for funeral homes is space. Funeral homes have large spaces where they can handle maybe depending on the size of the funeral home, of course, 200-300 people can be there. And they have all the technology in case there's different rooms that have to be opened up. So they do have a very good option for that. They have space for the audience, and this is what people are used to. We are showing people that there are options. When I started doing this, everyone said, well, what funeral home are you going to? And I said, well, we're doing it in a park. They'd never heard of anything like this. They thought, well, is that legal? The first question I get is it legal? Can you do that? Well, of course we can. And the more we do it, we're kind of going viral very slowly in a sense. I'd meet 30, 40, 50 people or 100 people at the funeral and I chat with them. And then of course they go tell their friends and they go tell their friends and the word is slowly getting out. It's going to take a while though. If it's a funeral home, what I've done is I've contacted the directors. I go in and talk to them. I check out the layout. I provide them with my process. They're all very interested in what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it. Mostly they are used to dealing with ex-clergy or retired clergy and some clergy as well. The one I talked to had no idea that there was a Humanist officiant out there in Ottawa. It was the first time she'd heard about it. So provided her with the information, and she was very receptive. And okay. If you're going to do it at an outdoors venue, and this came up twice, get the exact location. You have their phone number. If you can get a GPS going, because a lot of people will say, meet me at this end of the park. They may not know Ottawa. So you have to be extremely precise at what you're getting. Otherwise, you're walking around in a park, kind of lost. At the outdoor venue, you find the family, you meet up with them, and then you figure out. I've likely figured out the logistics before, but when you get there, you can change it up a little bit. We can do it under a tree or by the water. Just a nice, pretty location. I can advise them where they can spread the ashes if necessary. There are some laws in some places about what to do with the ashes, but mostly you can do it on almost any public land, according to what I've been able to figure out from Google. There's no need to obtain specific permission from the provincial government to scatter the ashes on Crown lands, as long as they're uninhabited. If you're going to be on private land, of course, you have to ask permission for the landowner. Check cottage owners associations might get a little fussy if you start spreading ashes on a small lake. So that's something that you have to be considerate of, not to be throwing ashes where there might be even a hint of damaging the water. Now for the ceremony itself, a few points to consider. Length of service. I did one where I talked to the funeral director and I said, it looks like it's going to be about an hour and 10 or an hour and 15 minutes. And she said, that's way too long. But it was the first time I was at a funeral home. I realized later on that she was right. Under an hour would probably be better. The people get restless. They get tired of hearing people get up there and speak, even though they know the people that are speaking. It's still a long time to go, an hour and 15 minutes, especially when you have people who want to play music, sing a song, play guitar. Everybody wants to get into the act sometimes. And as an officiant, I have to be able to stand up and say, okay, we've got plenty of this. We have to cut down a little bit on the other things to keep it at a reasonable time. You have to check out the technical aspect of the funeral home or the place that you're going. For example, sound systems and the lighting. You can talk with the DJs, talk to the musical performers to get an idea of how long their songs are and what they're doing. The basic ceremony it's a very simple thing to do a funeral. It's difficult to do it, but the format is kind of like the format that we have in a wedding. There's a basic template. You follow the template and then add on what you need and what people would like to see. Every step should be written down to prevent forgetting what you want to do. You have to write everything down. At least this is what I do. So basically, when it's time to go and start the ceremony, we assemble the audience. I will give a welcoming message to the audience. Then I'll read several humanist type prose or readings. I connect the readings to the deceased. From the main contact, I get a brief life history of the deceased. Then I start calling up the readers. I stage manage everything. One of the things they like to hear is that when I say, I'll be calling you up, then they say, well, what do I do? How do I do this? I tell them, I will take care of everything. I'll call you up, show you where to stand, tell you when to begin. And then when you're finished, I'll thank you and send you back to your seat and so on. It comforts them to know that someone's in charge. Call up the first reader, then you have a few words, then the second reader and the third reader. If there are letters from the family, the officiant can read that. I would read the letters from people that are out of town and cannot make it. Music is optional. I much prefer people that will get up and sing a song. I've been to funerals where the guy liked songs that were like 20 minutes long, and they just played the music. It gets a little long. When the readers are done, I thank all the readers, and I have more humanist readings that I can find that correlate to the person's experience, the person's life, the person's experience in life. Then we have a moment of personal reflection, and finish off with a closing reading. And of course, I can give a message to the audience as to what will be taking place after the ceremony. So we have a conclusion, we have the closing reading, and thanking the audience. Let me carry on. Now, personal observations that I've noticed. Like I said before, the officiant must take charge. You'll have a lot of people wanting to give their ideas, and you listen to all the ideas. But at some point, you can't please everybody. You can't do everything they want. So they'll try to tell you how to do your job. Part of our responsibility is to do everything properly and in a compassionate way. But we can't be satisfying everybody. Mainly the family. The family is the one, the immediate family are the people that I really want to make sure is taken care of. Most people don't understand why we're doing these things or our motivations or the process. It's all new to them. To most of the people you're going to see in the audience, they've never heard of this before. This is really something that's in a way brand new. Like I said, the length of service is something to consider. My personal attitude, and it may be wrong, but if 20 people want to come up and say something, I'm not against that. However, once again, 20 people might speak for 20 minutes each, and that gets a bit long. So you have to be able to tell people, I'm sorry, we got a 5-minute limit. We'd love to have you up. Come on up and do it. But we have a time limit, especially when I'm contacting these people over the 3-4 days before the ceremony. I have to let them know about the time. One thing I noticed that one of them, the media presentation, they had a slideshow going. And every 15 seconds, a new shot came up. It was behind me and the slides were going, and I started to talk, and as I'm looking at the people, I realized they weren't looking at me or listening to the readers at all. They were watching the same 20 slides going up and down, going on behind me. A better idea would be to find one picture of the deceased and just leave it up there so that everyone can focus on the reader or the officiant. Something that came up a few times, I call it family friction. Because this is so new, I've had a couple of times where for example, the older brother in this one case, I'm not going to give any names to protect the guilty. He didn't understand why we're doing this, why the youngest sister was given the job to get everything organized. And when she said, I'm going to hire an officiant, well, the first thing he did was he tried to tell her what to do. But she was strong enough to be able to stand up and say, you told me to do this, I'm doing it my way. And there was a bit of back and forth between them. It turns out the whole family was confused or a little upset about the whole thing. The youngest sister knew what she wanted, and that's why she hired me. And once they realized that the youngest sister was going to get her way, they all calmed down, and we just let the service proceed. Family squabblings. This is a very sad time, a very tense time for the families, and not everyone's going to be in a perfect mood. So that's something else you have to be able to deal with. Stage managing. The officiant must have a laid out plan. You have to organize the speakers, performers, the music, etc. Helping members when they freeze up. One of the things I did was the son got up to give a eulogy, and he had it all written down, and he got halfway through and then he just froze. So I was going to go up and continue the reading, and I realized his mother was in the audience at the front row. So I made a signal and called her up, and she came up, and it was much more comforting for him to be with his mother. So she helped him read, and he got through it. A lot of tears. That's to be expected. Mainly, we have to create a positive and a heartfelt atmosphere. We show respect to all involved and allowing them to say goodbye in a familiar but structured way. After the service is over, I email the main contact and I provide a letter of closure, just to go over anything that she might want to talk about, or he. So in conclusion, this is a field that is bound to grow. As more and more people get more aware of what's going on in the world, they see more of the world around them, they begin to realize that there is more than one way to pay their respects to the family of the deceased. It is the same thing happening with weddings. When I first started doing the weddings 8 years ago, people said, "Is this legal? Is this real? You know, are you some kind of a fake officiant? I've never heard of this thing." 8 years later, everybody's heard of a wedding officiant. So it is starting, it is happening, and we will be the same way. Church attendance and, as a matter of fact, religiosity is starting to fade worldwide. And of course, scandals keep piling up, which is not helping now. We can provide a respectful alternative to the status quo. And that's pretty much it. Thank you for your interest.
That was great. Wonderful, Dave. Thank you very much for that. You covered a lot of ground there for sure. You opened up so many doors in terms of possibilities of things to talk about with respect to this. I think that we can. There have been some questions that have come out from the audience here. I'll just kick it off though with a general initial question. You talked about how there is very short time for to put something like this together, and the events have to happen very, very quickly. At the same time, you said you want it to be very customized, specifically around the life of the deceased, and so that seems to me at clash. You don't have a lot of time, yet you want it to be very customized. So how do you handle that kind of tension where you really want it to be about the deceased, but I mean, you have a very specific time frame. How do you handle that?
Well, that's what I mentioned with the first contact, the second and third. So for example, on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I would be calling the main contact every night. As I got an idea of what was going on with this person's life and how to construct it, I would ask a question and she would offer more information. One thing I did notice on one of the funerals, she was giving me information, but there was no obituary. I asked, is there an obituary? She got confused. She had an obituary, but it was not in the Ottawa Citizen or it was in a very small Westboro newspaper. And I managed to find it online. Something else I did was I went on Facebook and I found the gentleman who had died, and he was on Facebook, and he died on the 25th, and his Facebook page, by the way, his Facebook page is still up, and it ended on midnight on the 25th. So I guess I'm pretty sure he had a heart attack. I guess he went to bed and had a heart attack. I got a lot of information from the Facebook page that he had. So there's another way to get information, another way to make it more personal. This one gentleman was he was kind of like Uncle Buck or John Candy. He was a very gregarious uncle. He was the favorite uncle. And they didn't really tell me that when I was talking to them on the phone or by texting. Some of the family members that came up to read, they spoke about that, but they didn't tell me. So I was able to get a little bit more information just by Googling, just by searching.
Wow.
You do have to, you have to keep your questions in order, and you got to keep asking, and eventually little bits will come up and more stories, especially on the third contact, because the first night they're upset, second night a little less upset, third, okay, things are getting organized, they feel more comfortable, and you might get a little more information out of them that way.
Wow, have to really be in the loop.
David?
Okay, yeah, we have a question.
I have a bunch of questions actually.
Oh,
So
no.
letters of closure. Can you elaborate? Is it feedback for you, an officiant, or feedback to the family?
The closure letters that I sent were more to the main contact herself, themselves, telling them what I did, how we worked together, just discuss like an overall generalization of what happened, and asking them if there was anything that they'd like to see. None of them really got back to me for that kind of stuff. I just asked them a few questions. If I could do it over again, what would you like to see? But they were happy with what I did, and so they just didn't really get back to me too much on that.
Another question is, have officiants experience with conducting Zoom type funerals? And if so, how has that changed the event and who can attend, e.g. people from a distant country?
I'm not quite sure what you're getting at here.
Well, this person wants to know, have we done any Zoom funerals and who attends?
I have not done a Zoom funeral yet.
I think that, yeah, I think that's going to be an interesting discussion point for the panel as well. For people who have different ideas and different backgrounds and experience, and so let's return to that question in the second part of our meeting.
Then I have a question around, can you describe your first few clients and how that occurred? Maybe the first client and how you got that person.
I believe it was Rick. It was Rick Glowinka. They heard that he was. I think we're getting some kind of a feedback here.
Yeah, there was some noise there.
I got a call from, I believe it was Rick. He wasn't comfortable doing funerals. He'd only been a marriage officiant for a couple of years, and he wasn't really keen on doing funerals. And he said, "Would you like to do it?" And I said, "Well, sure." I hadn't done any, but I was going to give it a try and see what I could do, try to put it together. So I just basically, in a sense, winged it. I figured if I was looking for an officiant, what would I want to see? And I just went from there and asked a lot of questions.
And finally, does it often occur that you speak at the funeral / wake and then accompany everyone to the cemetery and speak more? How do you handle that?
I have not been to a cemetery so far. We did everything at the venues or by the Ottawa River. Haven't gone. I would imagine you just have another short reading at the funeral site if there's going to be a burial or an interment of the ashes. So that's what I would prepare, a short reading, small reading.
I've done one at a cemetery and I did the eulogy there. Mm-hmm. Although Carol Berry says she can share.
You can share regarding cemetery. Okay, yeah. We're going to have an open discussion component to towards the latter part of our meeting today. So yes, Carol, we want to hear what you have to say about that at that point. That'd be great. Okay, so we had so much we wanted to cover in this event. So I think what we can do is if people have specific other direct questions that they have for you, Dave, they can direct message you in the chat and ask you direct questions in the chat, and you can respond to them that way. How's that for being able to do some kind of a follow up in a parallel stream? How's that?
I'm looking at it right now. I have it up on the side here.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot of questions, actually.
Okay.
People are chatting amongst themselves.
Yeah, sounds great. Okay.
Hi, Shake. How are you?
Good. Are you busy?
I'm on a workshop.
Okay.
Hi. Am I going to speak?
Well, Carol, I think we actually said we're going to have a fulsome discussion in a few minutes. So we'll invite you to speak then at that time. Is that all right?
Fine, thank you.
Okay, good.
Yes, great. Absolutely.
Thanks a lot, Carol.
Sorry.
That's okay. Okay, so thank you very much, Dave, for for enlightening us on your experience with respect to the role of the humanist officiant in an end-of-life ceremony. I think you, as I said before, you covered a lot of ground, and it opens up a lot of possibilities in terms of not only ideas in terms of how the officiant has a role to play in these ceremonies, but also opens up some questions, key questions, on how is it that humanist officiants and a humanist end of life ceremony
Ready
is
to go?
uniquely so. So yeah, we can get into that. Thanks again, Dave. So let me just share screen here and go. We just had a Q&A for that, so that was this Q&A component. And so we'll have now we're going to have a panel discussion. So at the appropriate point, I think, Sue, maybe you can spotlight our four panelists in the alphabetical order: Sean Copeland, Martin Frith, Julianne Levitt, and Tim Moore. So let's stop and put on the co-spotlight. There's Julianne.
Oh,
there's Martin.
Okay.
There's Sean.
And Tim.
There's Tim.
Where is he?
And
Tim.
okay. So this is the second part of our meeting where we're going to have a panel discussion. Thank you very much, panelists, for agreeing to be in our meeting today and discuss these interesting subjects here. So alphabetically, I'm just going to introduce to you our panelists, beginning with Sean Copeland. Sean Copeland is with over 30 years of experience. Sean is a fourth generation funeral director and owner of Welland Funeral Home, a family business carried on from Sean's great-grandfather, John J.P. Whalen. Sean is also a past board member and president of the local Funeral Service Association. When it comes to funeral events, it would be fair to say that Sean has pretty much seen it all. Our next panelist is Martin Frith. For many of you, as you know, Martin doesn't really need an introduction here. Very briefly, I'll just mention that Martin has been a humanist officiant for more than 18 years and is currently president of Humanist Canada, the country's national organization for secular humanists, atheists, and agnostics. Martin's career involves a professional practice in relationship counseling and also in grief and bereavement. So Martin's an expert, and we're glad to see him here this evening. Julianne Levitt is with Bereaved Families of Ontario and has been a funeral celebrant since 2006. Julianne has officiated at over 100 funerals, memorials, and graveside services for all kinds of families. Her academic background includes pastoral studies, theology, religion, and trauma-informed care. And also we have Tim Moore, member of Humanist Ottawa and longtime humanist hailing from England. Tim Moore has a PhD from London and Loughborough University and is a 23-year veteran of Nortel and sessional lecturer at Carleton University working in ergonomics and industrial design. Thank you, panelists, for coming to join us today. I'd want to open up, as we had mentioned in the event, this is a humanist officiant sharing event, and so this is a panel discussion on various aspects. Initially, what I would invite the four panelists to do is react, perhaps, to some of the things you've heard Dave say in his opening keynote presentation. Are there any impressions that you have on what Dave has said, something that sort of you remarked on or had an initial impression on? Perhaps starting with Sean.
Thank you very much, Robert. In all throughout Dave's presentation, I felt that he was definitely touching on very, very familiar aspects. And if some of the guests have been keying in on weddings, the time factor is, I'll tell you right now, is an absolutely bang on. I always tell my friends, wedding planners have a year. That's an unheard luxury. I usually have about a day or maybe even just 3 or 4 hours to set in motion a lot of the components. And a component of a funeral is contacting and helping a family find a celebrant if they don't already have one. And, and if you find that you're having a need to reach out to families, contact your local funeral director. I'd be more than happy to keep your name on file, keep a face. It's a connection with people. So if you make a connection with a funeral director, we're not that scary. Then I think you're going to have a very good opportunity to make a connection with your client families and to build and to grow on that. And David is a perfect example of someone who's built on that, and Julianne as well. I know from prior visits, she definitely is the type of person that makes a connection with a person. And in my job as a funeral director, that's my repeat business, is making connections with families.
Great. Julianne, what did you think of what Dave had to say?
I was, let me see. Yeah, I was struck by the kind of the emphasis on the event planning aspect, which a lot of funeral directors find they're doing more and more as the options increase. Sometimes people want to do more, and that's where the gift of time is truly a gift, because if you only have 2 or 3 days, then it's going to be contained. The longer the timeline is between the date, if you're planning a memorial for 6 weeks, it's going to get more and more and more. It's going to be more and more moving parts. So I really appreciate the short time window. I don't tend to speak to as many people as Dave does. I have one family meeting, and it's quite typical that I'll pull up to the address and there'll be a lot of vehicles parked outside because many of the family members will be there. I'll go in, the dining room table is set up, everybody's sitting there. There's usually something to eat, and there's one empty chair for me. It's often at the head of the table. This last visit, it was at the side. Would you like coffee? Oh, yes, please. And then we just do storytelling, and I ask them about the deceased. I look around the room, I look around the house, and I soak in the information, and I might ask about photographs or objects, etc. We have some laughs, and there's some quiet moments. I ask them for recommendations, favorite readings, etc. And then I'm at the point where I can, an hour is pretty good. I'm able to craft a service with about an hour of interview time with the family. People find that very, very meaningful, that gathering time, that storytelling time. Obviously, we're planning for a service, but intimacy of that sharing, that you're sharing with somebody who's a stranger to the family, and you're saying things for the first time in the wake of the death, be it a week, 6 months, a year. It's very special. So I encourage you all just to really value that time as well, that in the lead up the ceremony.
Okay, wonderful. You're straddling a bunch of hats in terms of in terms of an event like very highly emotional. Martin, would you have any thoughts on what Dave had to say? Oh, your
You're unmuted,
sound.
Martin.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
The technical difficulties.
There you go.
So, I think one of the things that Dave had spoken to and others have captured is the idiosyncratic nature of a funeral. That we're really working to capture a life well lived. And it really is going to be unique to that individual. And so, at the heart of certainly a funeral is the narrative, an individual story, and so what I typically tend to find is that there's a lot of healing that comes through sharing stories, and when people are able to begin that process, a funeral is really a movement from the sharing, moving from a relationship of presence to a relationship of memory. And I think that the funeral is really a wonderful way to begin that journey for families. So I'm most happy when there is engaged in the process as they would like to be, and there's numerous ways that I will try and do that. And so, in some ways, is that the more that they carry, the happier I am. And I often find it's the most productive thing for them. And of course, there are occasions when families are not able to do that. And so I see myself as being a major facilitator of things as they're unfolding. And as Dave had mentioned, being able to provide the structure or the container for the event, and so that people have a familiar pathway through this experience. Like a good book, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that makes for a rich service. And recognizing that it's impossible to capture all of one's life in the short time that we have. And so I'm often, inviting people to think of this as, a beginning of sharing memories, and that they will be able to continue them, at the reception afterwards, or and so it's always leading about how they might incorporate those memories in the days and months and years ahead. So thanks, Dave, for a great lead into this rich topic.
Great, that's wonderful. Tim, do you have any thoughts on what people have said so far? Oh, you need to turn on your microphone as well. Okay, there you go.
Nope.
Okay, there you go.
Yes. I turned it off on purpose in case there were noises here. Sorry.
Okay.
So yeah, it's very interesting to hear the talks from the different officiants. I'm not an officiant. I never have been. I don't plan to be. I don't think. But I'm interested in the whole area of this last few days of a person's life and death and disposal. I did some research on different methods of body disposal. We're all very familiar with the regular funeral where the body is lowered into the ground 6 feet down in a vault with great big coffins, etc. Then other people want green funerals. Other people want funerals where they're turned into compost within hours or days. And the part of the problem with that is this issue of how the family is going to deal with it. But I was also, I was actually the person who asked about the question about the Zoom funeral, because last year during COVID, I actually sent an email to a friend of mine and discovered from his brother that he died 3 days beforehand. And would I like to attend the funeral because I could go on a Zoom funeral? And I could attend the funeral in a virtual sense. I could hear the speeches. I could give a little presentation either by text or by speaking, and I could. They also mentioned that I was watching, somewhere in Britain, and so I thought that was actually a wonderful thing, because many times people can't attend funerals for whatever reason. The time scale is very short, and they're in another country, but they'd love to take part in the funeral. And I think that's something that I was suggesting that. Zoom was obviously it's part of a regular ceremony, but you have a camera at the back, and then people can actually attend, if you like, virtually. I thought that worked well. So I don't know if anybody wants to talk about different methods of body disposal. If you want, I've done the research into that, although it's very important nowadays, because people are especially people who are humanists maybe have a scientific background and also are concerned about the environment. Death is quite environmentally difficult too. Even cremation can cause mercury to be emitted into the atmosphere, etc. So there are there are other ways of disposing, but they're new, and people still have to get used to them. But some of them are much easier than others to accept. So Margaret Atwood actually has joined an organization where the body is disposed within I think 30 days into a compost that you can actually use on the garden, and you can actually grow vegetables with it, and it's not at all body-like after 30 days, but it's very environmentally friendly, if you like. So that's what I'm looking forward to, being having always thought that I was not like a rose, but I was equivalent to maybe some ugly animal or something, but I would die at some stage. But I hoped that I could go back into the earth and start the process all over again. So I've been very entertained by what you've said. So it's very informative. Thank you.
I think, Sean, you as a funeral director, you have most direct connection with those kinds of logistical aspects of the whole situation. Did you have any ideas in terms of non-traditional methods in terms of that?
Yes, absolutely. Along the lines of what Tim was saying, is that the important thing is that one's wishes need to be relayed to one's family or a funeral director. I mean, I try and tell everyone I know, get yourself a power of attorney, make yourself a will, talk with your family about those two documents, and please even approach the most basic type of funeralization ideas with your family. And if you feel like it's necessary, go and see a funeral director or some sort of person who is going to then record and give you the facts about what is possible. And look, there are no cookie cutter funerals. My grandfather's day, absolutely. You had lots of choices, just like the Ford. You could have it in black or black. Funerals, you could have 1 day visitation, 2 days visitation, or 3 days visitation before the mass and burial, and that was it. But that was a long time ago. Now every family who comes in, they have a story they want to tell. They have a way of disposition, be it aquamation, cremation. Have not had any Viking requests yet, Tim, but I know that day is coming when someone wants to. But you're very much right. The type of funeral also is also keyed into how the person lived their life. And I think Churchill said along the lines, "Show me a way society deals with their dead, and it'll say a lot about how they lived." And so, yeah, I definitely concur, Tim.
I can imagine that how the body is managed also affects things like the venue and the nature of the ceremony as well. There are other ripple effects of that on other aspects of the ceremony. Did either of you, Julianne, did you have a thought about that?
I just wanted to pick up on something Sean mentioned about how we treat our dead as a measure of our society, the health and functioning of our society. And I worked for a number of years for Beechwood Cemetery, and I had opportunities to do services for people who would not typically have chosen a church service or nor were able to pay for a full-on funeral. You may be aware that the city of Ottawa, and I'm sure other municipalities, will pay an officiant a modest amount to conduct a service. And those experiences have been very meaningful for me. I have met for funeral planning in Tim Hortons. I have had the pleasure of officiating at a graveside where the woman so frequently called the radio station that two of the radio hosts actually came and attended the service. Serving any kind of family is very meaningful, but as you try to build your practices, it might be worthwhile to let funeral homes know that you'd be happy to do City of Ottawa calls, for instance.
That's a very important. Go ahead.
Another piece I wanted to mention, in a service, it can be very meaningful for the guest or the attendees to perform some kind of gesture. be it laying a rose in the grave or lighting a candle as part of the ceremony, writing a word on a stone and collecting all of these in a bowl, which could be a gift to the family at the end. Various things like that. They don't have to be large gestures, but it's a way for people to participate. Perhaps they don't want to read or sing or stand up at the front, but perhaps they'd be quite happy to light a candle and have a quiet, just a few seconds to do that. Often when there's a casket present, people will want to lay their hand on a casket for a few minutes. The same thing with an urn. Sometimes at a graveside, I've held up, or a family member has held up the urn and passed it around all the attendees for us to just place a hand on it as well. The sprinkling of sand, ceremonial sand into the grave is another sort of time-honored gesture. And anybody can do that. It doesn't have to rest with the officiant. And one of my favorite colleagues, who's a Unitarian, says, rather than saying ashes to ashes, he says, from stardust to stardust. From stardust we come, from stardust we return. So I encourage you to think of these little threads that you can invite people.
That's beautiful, Julianne.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Martin, one of the things I wanted to turn attention to you on is because in your background you have very much a counseling perspective in terms of the very emotional situation that people are facing, and so the officiant has to have a kind of a consoling counseling role to play, and obviously the family turns to whoever is closest. Perhaps that may be the funeral director. Perhaps that may be the officiant. How do you straddle the fence there in terms of offering a kind of a consolation and counseling, and also at the same time providing the full scope of humanist officiant services in these circumstances?
You're muted, Martin.
Oh, sorry, I keep thank you. So I make a distinction. So the funeral is not, or the memorial service or the celebration of life is not the time for counseling. And this is really about the as I say, about the beginning of the journey, or the first steps. So by way of example, I think that if one looks at some religious traditions where there's a talk of, and I'm thinking specific, well, I'll just leave it at that. But, an idea that there might be a conversation or the service is focused on resurrection, and they're not even in the ground yet. So there's cognitive dissonance with all of that. And so I think that part of the journey is really being able to give a space for people at the very beginning of this journey. So for example, one of the things that I might begin, and certainly if there are traumatic deaths that people may have encountered, and so that being able to set a context or the parameters around what we're really about on this particular occasion. So I'll use words such as, that today's, a day that we're not here to maybe to have have our questions answered. Today's a day that we're going to be here to be able to say goodbye, and to remember someone who's been in our midst, and to recognize that, if there are traumatic questions, so I'm thinking of car crashes, or in particular homicide, suicide, where people are grappling with those questions, and to be able to say, to be able to set some context that those are questions that are going to need to come after today. But today our primary focus is really about being able to remember and celebrate this life, and we'll have time to answer those other questions. So that's so I think I see myself, and I think that the role of officiants really is about companioning people through this time, as opposed to being, the therapist. And but it's also a role that we can invite everybody to be part of that role. So who's ever significant with them around this companioning role. So often one of my questions will be is, where are you getting your support right now? Who's here for you as an individual? Who's here for you as a family? And that those can be really helpful ways. A funeral is, in some ways, traditionally, it's been about mobilizing one's support system, not just as an individual, as a family. So the casseroles come, tuna, by the way, if you didn't get the memo.
Yeah.
And so, the casseroles, all of these kinds of, that's one of the functions of a funeral. So I think without getting too far down the grief journey, those are tasks that get dealt with later, but up front is really this piece about mobilizing a support system, acknowledging a death, and beginning a healing journey.
Mhm. I get the sense that there's some expectation that a humanist um, uh, funeral or end of life ceremony is in some way qualitatively different from a traditional religious event. What makes a humanist event humanist? What makes it distinctive? Anybody? Go
Well,
ahead.
yeah, I mean, I would certainly jump in to say that I think that recognizing and being able to articulate meaning of life and death, and not that big existential question, but being able to that this is a natural event. We will all experience it. We will all feel an element of loss because of these. And so being able to contextualize this in a life experience. So when I mentioned earlier, we part of this journey is moving from a relationship of presence to a relationship of memory. It's a really helpful model for me around thinking about the grief journey and this journey, so that that it's, yes, a person has died, but you know just because they've died, it doesn't mean the relationship has ended. Is that they're still a part of our lives. They still have a legacy that they left us. They're changed because of their presence in our lives, and we're changed because of their presence in our lives. And so for me, this is inherently part of what the humanist experience is, as I think about it.
Okay, that's very well said. I really appreciate that. I think Sean, you had mentioned that you had first come across various. You're prepared for the event and in your funeral home to be non-traditional and or varied or whatnot. So how do you become aware of humanist officiants, and how what is the business relationship in terms of marketing what humanist officiants can market their services to Welland Funeral Home or to other funeral homes? How do they become aware of you, and how do you become aware of them?
Yeah, there's someone in our industry who coined a phrase, first call gets it all. So whether it's a cemetery or funeral director, but that first call for service where someone has passed, they have been, for lack of a better word, entrusted with making a lot of not making a lot of decisions, sorry, asking the family and meeting with the family to help them decide on what thing. I very rarely have someone come in, a family come in and are completely have everything under control and basically just need my very compartmentalized things having to do with the body. More often than not, it's how can do we have space to have a little gathering? Yes. Can we have some food here? Yes. Do you know someone who's non-religious? Yes, I have a list of some celebrants that we use. Not necessarily humanist celebrants. I mean that's I think key is that as far as a humanist celebrant, and I don't know how different that is from other celebrants, because there's definitely a need, and I've seen over the years from when I first started almost non-existent, and any celebrants were usually United ministers that were they had families that wanted to go off piste, a little not, be right on the doctrine trail, and I totally understand that, and I'm listening, and born and raised a Catholic, as was Dave, but I definitely concur that it doesn't. There's not an end all. The Catholic faith doesn't, especially in funerals. They are more interested in their doctrine, their message. When I give a family a name or recommend a celebrant, oh boy, they come back afterwards saying, "Wow, they wanted to know. They got me. They asked the right questions. They were able to take the time to explore what a life was to my husband and I and our children, and they made us feel involved." And I think that's the key thing, is that this is your, as I tell a family, I said, that this is your celebration, your event. It should go the way, and a lot of them have no idea how it should go. So having that gentle guidance is definitely something I take great pride in, is putting together with people of like-minded. I was telling some of the other people that we talked about prior to this Zoom call, is that I had a professor, and he said, when you're meeting with a family, have a little sign, imaginary sign in front of you, and it should say, "Wait," and it stands for, "Why am I talking?" Because my job is to listen, and to, when I do interject, it's to get that information, to let them tell their story. One of the little things I always use when I meet with a family, I turn to the widow, who usually is letting sometimes her kids do the talking, and I just gently say, "How did you meet?" And oh boy, the stories come out, and the air is now fresh, and because now she's reliving joy, as opposed to the last 24 hours, which was, although maybe it was an upcoming event they knew was to happen, but it takes the wind out of. I haven't met a family where it hasn't taken the wind out of them, and they need an opportunity to tell their story, to start on that road of telling their story. So it's feeling out, and you get that from experience, is feeling out what a family needs, and you know what, I don't get it right 100% of the time, so but I'm pretty good at feeling out what a family needs, and sometimes it's absolutely nothing. I stand back. You know what, they need to go down that road and take it and run with it, and I will interject where I think it's needed, but sometimes it's just better to stand aside. So
Sounds great. Julianne, it sounds like you had some thoughts on that.
Well, I just thinking about what Martin said, and it's not all staying with me, but I think you had asked the question, Robert, what is qualitatively different about a humanist service versus a non-denominational or a non-religious service? And I think the pastoral needs that we're trying to meet are the same, really, in any kind of service. We've heard a lot about the Catholic Church and how their services are not, the funeral mass is not focused on the individual. It is the soul going to the communion of saints. That's that way of thinking. A lot of people obviously are not choosing that, but I started out in the United Church, Sean, and certainly had, met families. I mean, if you wanted to be just barely churchy, you could still go to the United Church, right? Because they seem to be the most liberal. And I've been to all kinds of services, whether there's clergy or celebrants, and they can be so rich. I mean, when you think of who's going into church ministry these days, they're an interesting bunch of people. I mean, they're not all retirees. They're people who've had careers and maybe in their 50s, they're switching it up. And so they're bringing a whole lot of life experience. So, even people who are active, clergy who are active in churches, are still doing some rich and interesting things and really wanting to meet the family where they're at. Perhaps one of the differences, I would say, in what I do as a sort of a non-denominational, is that I do try to situate the life in the larger life that we all share. We give thanks for the one life and give thanks for all of life. Give thanks, give praise, give gratitude. So there's that sort of dimension that it's not just, we're not just looking at the individual, because I don't think that's enough. I think when we're faced with death, when a family's faced with that immensity of the loss, we need to remember that we're not alone in that journey. That we have people, life is terminal. No one here gets out alive. And it's something that connects us with all of humanity. So that's just a dimension that I try to recall. But I think, any humanist officiant probably would as well. So
Yeah,
it's an interesting question, Robert.
Yeah, in our previous discussion, you had mentioned, well, for the critical moment, or one of the most critical moments in the whole thing, is committal of the body, and you think, well, this is for in your previous discussion, this is for you where it cries out for references to the supernatural and what happens next.
Well, I don't believe I used the word supernatural, but I think it is a time when people do consider that.
I see. Okay. Yeah. So the other thing I just want to touch upon, one of the things that earlier Sean you had mentioned, which is when discussing things with the family calls you up and you're starting from scratch. Oftentimes, I guess a family doesn't explicitly or rarely explicitly says, "I'm looking for a humanist event," or a humanist. They say, use other kinds of code words, non-religious, not too religious, whatever. What would be the light bulb that would come on for you in terms of what a family would say, to think, okay, they're looking for a humanist officiant here? Is there anything that you would need the family to say and read between the lines or whatever to recognize that they're looking for something which is actually something humanist, as opposed to low-key religious or whatever you want to call it in terms of degree of treatment?
Yeah, I mean that's very interesting, because I don't have necessarily the experience of someone identifying specifically. They're very good at identifying non-religious or non-faith, and one of my questions still on my portfolio was faith, and so and I don't always put in non, but like at least it helps me identify what kind of road are we going down. So when someone tells me though that there's a good number of people that are in the family are of a certain faith, but you have an outlier who is making the decisions, and she said, you know what, to be perfectly honest, that was not my dad. He wouldn't have wanted this. So then you realize how strong the emotions, and then it's a matter of a tribute to him in not being, in honoring his wishes or his way of thinking or living, and that to me is very much key. I'm listening very intently then in okay, now I need to help this family, and a lot of celebrants are still using, we're a social people, we have values. Does religion touch those values as well? Yes. So you're going to hear some of the same things about how people live their life, but it's not entirely, the doctrine road. When I hear a celebrant talking about certain things and themes, oh, well, I kind of heard that from a retired priest too. He used that parable or that story as well, just in a slightly different way. I mean, there's living a good life and a good giving back to the world and leaving it a better place. That could be humanist. It could be certain religious faith that you want to give back to your fellow man. That's so there's definitely some themes that I think are covered by both. As far as trying to guide a family to, oh, this is a family that's going to be in need of a celebrant, then and helping them down that road. I'm definitely sensitive. I have been in the last 10 or 15 years a heck of a lot more than I was at the beginning of my career, some 30 years ago. But in the next few years, I definitely foresee, just like Zoom calls, Tim hit it right on the our Zoom funerals are not going anywhere, COVID or not, because it's an excellent venue to allow people to be there, to be present, to speak, to hear. I had an orchestra playing in a church. They recorded their pieces in Toronto and sent it up to Ottawa and sent it to me so I could incorporate it. So I was doing a lot of things Sue and Robert were doing tonight in composing the funeral. And for lack of a better term, I've had to learn how to master bringing people in from Germany or Australia and letting them speak, and then back to the celebrant or back to the priest or back to, yeah, and it's become part of wakes, although they haven't been big wakes, the 10 people that we were allowed to have gather in our building with the body. Boy, was that video terminal ever important, because the other 40 people that wanted to be there could be in a lot of ways. So yeah, that's inclusion.
Wow. Does anybody else have any direct experience of online, either an online component or some kind of virtual or social media aspect to the event, a humanist ceremony or end of life ceremony?
Yeah, I do. The last funeral I had, I did. However, the people were very disorganized, and it was like, no, I've got the camera. And so, there was that element to it. But yeah, so like they didn't get me involved at all. They were going to see Great Aunt Ruth in Labrador, and it just wasn't really happening very well.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't imagine how. I mean, it's such a personal human event that the online aspect makes it very hard.
Although, as I'd say, as Sean had touched on in some ways, I mean, it is this new modern way that had we not lived through COVID, none of us might have experienced this. My mom died in February, and again, so we were allowed 10 people, and for it to be in the chapel, and but we had 140 other people, and one of the reasons why we decided to do that was um, I have a niece, so my mom's granddaughter. One was living in Australia, another nephew in BC, or a grandchild, another grandchild in the U.S. And so it really was a wonderful way for everybody to be there. And then again we were able to put together a collage of photos that everybody was able to see as well, and so it really did make for a rich opportunity rather than it feeling cold. And with an opportunity for people to share memories. Now it was just something that was sent out, so it wasn't an opportunity. It was very well organized and it was high quality, which I also think makes a difference. Where there was a videographer who was actually able to zoom in on the celebrant and on the speakers, and it panned to the audience, all 10 of us, and but it really was inclusive in that way.
Wow. So, I mean, obviously there are elements of quality in terms of planning, given the short time frame in which these things have to be put together. So, what for you, Martin, would you consider success in terms of the goal that Humanist Officiant should be working towards in something like this? What makes a job well done?
Ah, well, and honestly, and it's not just a humanist efficient, but I never feel like, now there are exceptions to what I'm going to say, but I never feel like it's been a success unless people have laughed and cried. And the reason for that simply being, and I think that there are exceptions to this, and I'd be interested in hearing other panelists' thought on that as well. But the idea about laughing and crying is I part of the invitation for me is not just thinking about people or the individual at this moment in time, because we miss out, the breath of their life. And so there have been moments of laughter, there have been moments of tears, and so often giving people permission for that at the very beginning, to say, today may be an opportunity where, a tear crosses your eye, or a smile does, or there's laughter, and that's all part of this rich mix of life. And so just by virtue of giving people permission that this doesn't have to be, long faces, already creates a space. So I think a good service is one that's not prescriptive, but actually invites people to be there in whatever way, in their own unique relationships with the individual. And so I think if we can create the space for that to happen, or if I can do that, then I think it's been a success. Now, having said that, I think that there are exceptions. So, to this, so that there are some obviously very sudden deaths, tragic deaths, traumatic deaths, where there may not be an opportunity for laughter, and so having set aside those circumstances, I think my earlier comment would stand.
It's a very emotional time. The other panelists, Tim, what do you think about what would consider a successful event?
Not really. I'm not really the best person to answer that question, because I'm not an officiant, but I've been to funerals and found funerals more meaningful than weddings. I've been to quite a few weddings and quite a few funerals, and generally the weddings, because they're concentrating on those two people, and that's their day, whereas actually a funeral, strangely enough, is everyone else's day to celebrate that person that's died. So you do have certain people there that you care more about, a spouse or children, and people who are particularly close to the person who died. But the opportunity to talk to people at a funeral is often a lot more meaningful, I found. I think it's because it's full of emotion, and people do really feel more present at a funeral than a wedding somehow. Maybe that's my reaction. But I would say success is, as you said, crying and laughter. I've already got a few funny poems that I've got ready for my funeral that I'm hoping somebody will read, that reflect my humor. And my mother, before she died, she arranged her own funeral, and it was really well organized at a green cemetery with a wool, whatever you call them, the covering. Which was felted, and she loved crafts, and I joked that she'd actually made it, but because it was that kind of thing that's what makes funerals really special, is the little things. They sometimes make you laugh and sometimes they make you cry, but they always make you feel for that person. You've remembered them.
Yes, Julie and Sean, what do you think of what constitutes success?
Go ahead, Sean.
I definitely concur with Martin. I even in the first hours that I'm meeting a family, if I don't have just a little chuckle out of some of the family, and this is like right as we're making all the statistical and getting all the information, I'm definitely, well, and it's my character, is that I'm going to find something that we can, and if it's self-deprivating, then that's fine, but I'm going to let them try and lower their guard, because I see the tension, and I see that, my grandfather always said he never worried about the people who were crying, because that was an outlet, and it let them. He worried about the ones that were trying to hold it all in, because they were trying their hardest not to let anything out. But yeah, a little chuckle, a little laugh, and then, as Tim said, he's enjoyed funerals more than weddings for the realness of it, because you're gathering a bunch of people who didn't have 8 months an invitation 8 months ago to think about this weekend that was going to be taken out of their summer, as weekends are very valuable, even if it's family. But no, the purpose of families gathering together is to support each other in a time of a funeral. And I find the most meaningful conversations that I overhear among cousins or brother and sister who haven't seen each other in a while, friends that have come to support other family. And you know, there's no other place, especially the people who are not part of the regular family, because they've taken the time out of their day to say, hey, I respect you as a person and the loss that you've had, and there's no other place I want to be than here to support you. And so funerals definitely, yeah, I'm not a wedding planner for a reason.
Okay.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
People have often suggested to me that I become a wedding officiant, and I'm just, I really prefer funerals for all the reasons that Tim and Sean talked about. Those of us in the funeral industry, we tend to be lifers. Like we love it. It's very, very special. Just in terms of how do we know we've done a good job? What Martin said, if we've laughed and we've cried. Also, if the family members want to hug me afterwards, that's always good. And then if they refer me. So I've done like 3 members of the same family over a couple of years. And it's just so wonderful to be that person that you have an established relationship with the family already. So, or then sometimes they're out of town and you'll never hear from them again, but maybe you'll get a card or an email. And, you know, our role is just to thank them and send them on their way.
Wow, that's very well said. I really appreciate that. The other aspect, of course, of this is from the standpoint of the officiant is the difficulties, the challenges, the things that are the hard part of the job. And I would like to know from your perspective. I think that perhaps we have touched upon some aspect of it in terms of just basically getting the word out that humanist officiants exist and that this can happen. But what from your perspective is the difficult part of this for you? I mean, is this what's the hard bit? The chart, it gives you a challenge. Is there anything or is it all easy?
Could you tighten up your question?
Okay, well, let me give you an example. This is a very emotional time for people.
Mhm.
And of course, tears are the main thing. But sometimes, in terms of people's emotions, they express anger.
Mhm.
Because they're all across the board, and it's just a wild time. So, how would you deal with, as Dave had mentioned in his presentation, not only family friction, but an emotional about outbursts of anger? How do you handle that?
I know I've had families that are all over the place. And when I mean they've come with a lot of baggage, and they feel like maybe this is the time that they're going to have an opportunity to let another member of the family know how they really feel. So yeah, it can it can escalate quite high. I had one wake here at the funeral home where one of the 3 brothers, one of them was in the parking lot, and he had the trunk open, and his friends met him there, and he had some beer going out of a cooler. The other brother who was inside beside the casket in the visitation parlor, and then we have a lounge upstairs in our funeral home, and another brother was there, and the 3 of them did not talk to each other. They experienced the people and their friends coming to pay respects, but by the end of the funeral, though, they were seeing eye to eye. So it was, but there's definitely not every circumstance, maybe 10% of circumstances where family dynamics, I have to really watch who I'm talking to and who is in charge, and not and also diplomatically not ignore the person who isn't in charge, because they've had a loss as well, and sometimes they're the person who actually needs most of my attention. And whether they've I always say, and I'll tell a celebrant right now, beware of the out-of-towners. They come in like a big wind, and they blow everything up, and they blow right back out again. And sometimes that family dynamic, boy oh boy, it's I always am a little cautious about the out-of-towners, but I'm also very I want to listen to those people because they haven't had the opportunity to be near their dad, their mom, in the days and weeks upcoming to their death. So they are hurting in a different way. The other family have had the luxury of popping over to the hospital, to having them die at home and caring for them. There's a tremendous amount of guilt with the other family members who are away and are coming in now because they feel like sometimes, oh, I didn't do enough, or they're questioning themselves, did I do enough? And the tremendous amount of guilt manifests itself in a tremendous amount of ways. So I'm always very, very cognizant of those out-of-towners, that they're experiencing the death and the loss in a very different way.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that?
We have about 15 minutes left.
Yeah. So let's turn to an open Q&A component then for people in the chat who have been very patient with their specific questions for the panelists. Perhaps we can then turn to some of the chats. I understand that Carol had something that she wanted to share. If she's there, we can bring her in and have her comment or question.
Carol, are you there? Oh, she's not
She stepped away.
Yeah.
Well, Sue, what are some of the questions we've had in the chat?
I was wondering about, is there a shortage of officiants? Anita Ofner has asked that. Is there a shortage of officiants? You may be the best person to answer that. Where are you? No. Martin, are you there?
I am.
Okay.
I am.
Is there a shortage of officiants in Canada?
Well, and Sean may be a good person to ask that. I don't think that there's a shortage of officiants, and certainly in Ontario, I can say Humanist Canada, we have over 80 officiants in Ontario. And I think that still within, it's how one comes in contact with officiants. So, I mean, I can tell you that historically, when I ran an aftercare program for a funeral home, and so I often did, in addition to that, I often did officiated for families that were looking for a non-religious ceremony or for a humanist ceremony, or that through weddings is that, I've officiated for brides and grooms' parents, sometimes spouses. So, that it's all about where those connections come from, and having the word out there. So I think we're still a best kept secret. But it sounds like, Sean, you have a host of celebrants on your list. That do you think there's a shortage?
No, I don't believe so. Well, maybe good ones. There's definitely some in our city that have, oh yeah, he's a little quirky, or they definitely have some. That person doesn't, I think, do it anymore. That was about 10 or 15 years ago. But yeah, he was. Anyways, but I definitely do have a couple of go-tos, and I get very glowing letters afterwards, or calls, and recommendations and referrals. Julianne, you're exactly right. It's I rely on that as well, and I don't advertise as a funeral home. We don't advertise. We rely on people who've had good service year after year, and I always take the time, if it's a new family, to ask, how did you hear about us? Because I am curious, and I rely on people saying, yeah, no, Wayland's, they're the fair ones. They're the ones that listened. You know, our pricing and things is one thing, and but making a connection with a family and having them go away and think, wow, I was really heard. I was given options. Information was power to me, and I'm a firm believer that I'm going to inform the family that we're serving, and whether we've served that family for generations or it's somebody's completely off the street. Absolutely, they're going to have all their options in front of them.
In terms of ordinary business working relationship here, the funeral director plays a role of general contractor, and everyone else feeds up through that through you as a central coordinator in terms of events, costs, shares, et cetera, et cetera. So in effect, from the standpoint of the officiant, the family is not really the direct client. You are the client, right?
Very much so. You know, and that's not 100%, but it certainly is more the norm that on my funeral service contract, there is a section for listing our services and the things that we provide and merchandise. And then disbursements, newspaper, flowers, catering, cemetery fees, celebrant, church. I mean, these are all things that are at cost that I pay out to on behalf of the family, and the exact cost is written right there. Memorial cards, inscription, engraving things. You know what? I'm trying to be as complete as possible, because for the average estate or executor, they want to have a true picture of what the costs are going to be. And to be complete, I think, is a gift to them to say, oh wow, then we're just dealing with one, and we can, it's very upfront that this is how much things are going to cost. And I try and say, but you may want to consider, and they may want to, you know what, we're going to take care of our own newspaper, or we don't need flowers. I have a friend, absolutely perfect. It's you know, it's like a good hairdresser. A lot of people have in their back pocket a good florist, and who you trust. And if you don't, then I've got some people I trust, and I'd be happy to introduce them to you as well. So, but yeah, a celebrant is exactly that. One of those people I have in my back pocket and say, hey, this person took the time to meet me. They're a great communicator. I think there'll be a connection.
Robert, we've had a couple of questions about fees.
Yeah.
So Anita was asking, what are the officiant fees? And then Christina Nicole asked, I asked a question earlier about fees. What are the arrangements? So does Humanist Canada get a donation from families when hiring a humanist officiant?
Yeah, to that question, no. And so, yes, so Humanist Canada trains and appoints officiants. But in terms of, you know, their remuneration, it can vary quite greatly. So, you know, Ottawa will have a general pricing, Toronto will, smaller communities will, and so that funeral homes generally have some guidelines around what the officiant fees are that they generally disperse. And then for some, you know, that'll be something that's coordinated specifically with the officiant. So sometimes families will say to the funeral director is that we'd like to look after the officiant. And they'll do that. And I always prefer it when the funeral home looks after the officiant. So yes, but there are no donations or money that comes back to Humanist Canada from services provided.
Carol is back now.
Yeah, Carol.
Thank you, Martin. Carol.
Yeah, just turn on your microphone there.
Yep. Okay, I wanted to ask Sean a question. I had a green funeral, and the family provided a shroud or a body covering, and they wanted to use that. And the cemetery, which was having a green funeral, insisted they had to have a coffin, a wooden coffin. Is that a requirement, a legal requirement?
Now, what type of what type of disposition was this? Was it a burial or a cremation?
Burial,
It was
a
burial.
burial.
So
Yep.
cemeteries will have, and independently of any of each other as well, um, guidelines or bylaws, and most cemeteries, for the safety of their staff, they may request or require the equivalent to 1/4 inch lumber as a holding vessel for a body, in as much that to have someone in a shroud, that's it's very difficult. If you're imagining someone who's 108 pounds, well, that's going to be a little easier. If it's someone who's closer to 200 pounds, and the person has been deceased for several days, and a green funeral does not allow us to embalm and prepare the body in a way that will stop those natural things. So, and then how do we as a funeral director get the person to the cemetery? So I would tend to agree that a very basic container, or
Okay.
at least something rigid, should be used. But I can't say. You'd have to check with the cemetery. Now, as more green burials become the norm, I think cemeteries are going to change their bylaws. They're going to be more sensitive. Wicker, we have a wicker a wicker casket coffin, so it is definitely more biodegradable. We have poplar containers that do not have any nails, natural glues, linseed oil, linen interior. They're a greener option. But the 6 feet under show where they wrapped someone in burlap and lowered them into the ground, yes, it's possible, but not necessarily always the going to be the easiest method. So more labor intensive. I would always say, yes, I'm willing to try, but
So I
ultimately,
see
ultimately the cemetery's bylaws are what I too
Okay, thank
have
you.
to. Cheers.
Sounds great. So we have a final few minutes, and I'd just like to give our panelists an opportunity to say a few closing words. If you think that something hasn't been covered, or something that needs to be said, perhaps give you an opportunity to say a few closing words. Like Julianne, do you have any final remarks you'd like to make?
I guess that, whenever we're invited to be with a family at this tremendously intimate touchstone time in their lives, everything that we offer needs to spring from the relationship that we've developed with them. Sean mentioned listening. He mentioned it several times. And I think that's just so important. And that then allows us to craft something that's really meaningful and reflective of the personality of that family. There was a question about family conflict and difficulties in the family. What if there was a poor relationship? My conviction is that though we might express it in tragic ways, families are at their very heart love stories. And it is our responsibility as officiants to find that vein of gold that is within the family story, and not to minimize the ore that it might be found in, but really to lift that up and hold a mirror back to that family and say, this is where I see the love and the beauty in your family, despite whatever difficulties they may have lived through and with.
Wow, well said. Martin, do you want to say a few words?
And well, only that journeying with folks at any point in their lives, but especially at this one, has been touched on, is a special occasion. And I recognize that, as an officiant, I'm, connected or part of their lives for this brief window of time, whatever the relationship is, and that I may have some other context with them, but so I it's very humbling to be part of people's lives, to hear their stories, to be able to help them celebrate them in a way that's going to be meaningful. And so, yeah, so I think that's for all of us as well, to think that, we have these opportunities to be able to celebrate. And so as you think about, your own lives, your own families, that people often don't realize there's as many options as there are. And so if there are things that you're thinking about them, by all means ask, and so that you can actually have an opportunity to do it and celebrate your way.
Wow, meaningfulness. Yes, I take that away as a key point for sure. People want something which is completely meaningful for sure. Tim, did you have any final thoughts?
No, I found it wonderful to hear what other people had to say, and I think it went extremely well. I was very impressed by it, and I think I found out a lot more about the Officiants than I knew before, and I'm really. But the only thing I would say is to everyone listening, be prepared maybe for your own funeral, but also be prepared for deaths that you think are coming up. Take a little bit of time with other family members to discuss what might happen, because 2 or 3 days is not a long time to get things together, especially when other things are happening within families, for example. So I think it's a good thing to be prepared for these kind of events when you could see them coming up ahead.
Good idea. Sean?
I'm going to keep it short. I'm very humbled that you asked me to participate today. I think Tim, Martin, Julianne, it was a pleasure to be on this venue with you. And David, you set a heck of a table for us all to consider. Robert and Susan, thank you so much for allowing me to just give you a little glimpse into my side of the table, and hopefully we'll all be at the same side of the table helping families. It's a tremendous privilege to serve a family in time of need, and it gives me an incredible personal high. I feel really good at night when I go to bed knowing that I've helped a little bit. So.
Yes. Thoughts of love to you too, Sean.
Cheers.
Sue, did you have any comments?
Me? No, well, I do. I have to say thank you to all of you who participated and all of you who came. Robert and I have been planning this for months now, and I'm so delighted that you're here, and I'm so delighted that you spoke from your hearts. Thank you, Martin. It was wonderful to see you here. I'm very glad you came. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and so to wrap up our event this evening, I want to thank everyone, the panelists and speakers. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, everyone for attending this event we've had here today. I didn't want to. I had some other comments that I wanted to mention, but forget it. That's okay. We're at time here right now. So thanks everyone for participating in this wonderful event. It's been very unique. And Humanist Ottawa will be planning other events for our fall schedule. So please stay tuned. And if you feel that you're interested in humanism or humanists or humanist officiants, contact, of course, any humanist association near you, including Humanist Canada, Humanist Ottawa, and very many other humanist organizations that are out there. So thank you very much for everyone for showing up tonight, and take care and have a wonderful evening.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.